I've always believed there's dignity in honest work. My hands may be rough, my clothes often stained with dust and machine oil. But they tell the story of someone who works hard to build comfort for others. I repair what people can't live without. Heating in the winter. Cool air in the summer. I'm not ashamed of that. At least, I wasn't until my own sister made me feel like I should be. Rachel was my only sibling. Growing up, we shared everything. School lunches, chores, and whispered secrets about our dreams. She wanted to be a lawyer. And I just wanted to build something real. Our parents didn't have much, so I picked up odd jobs during high school to help with bills. I paid for some of Rachel's textbooks when she went off to college, patching together my savings from long summer days, installing air conditioners. I thought she'd remember that. But the Rachel who returned home from law school wasn't the same girl who used to cry in my room when finals felt too heavy. She came back polished, ambitious, and guarded, like she had finally stepped into the world she always dreamed of, and she was afraid anything less than perfect might drag her back out. The first time I met her boyfriend, Daniel, was at a family dinner. He was the kind of man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine. Tall, confident, dressed in a suit so sharp it looked like it might cut anyone who stood too close. He shook my father's hand firmly, kissed my mother on the cheek, and then turned to me with a brief, polite smile. "And this is?" he asked Rachel, waiting for her to introduce me. There was a hesitation, just a heartbeat, but I noticed. Rachel's lips pressed together before she forced a smile. "This is my brother," she said quickly. "He's between jobs right now." The words burned hotter than the stovetop behind me. Between jobs? That wasn't true. I had just finished a week of 12-hour shifts, crawling through attics and basements, fixing broken HVAC units in the dead heat of July. I wasn't unemployed. I was working harder than ever. But she didn't want him to know that. I tried to laugh it off. "Not exactly. I run heating and air systems. Keeps me pretty busy this time of year." Daniel gave me that polite smile again, the kind you give to someone who hands you a flyer on the street before you toss it in the trash. "That's practical," he said, as if it was a compliment, though it didn't sound like one. Dinner carried on. But the bitterness in my chest sat heavier than the roast chicken on my plate. Rachel avoided looking at me whenever Daniel asked about her family. She answered in half-truths, painting herself as the daughter who had climbed from humble beginnings into something better. And when I tried to add a story or joke from our childhood, she'd cut me off with a quick, "Anyway," and change the subject. That night, after Daniel left, I asked her about it. "Why would you lie like that? You made me sound like some deadbeat with no direction." Rachel sighed, tired. Like I was a child asking too many questions. "You wouldn't understand. Daniel's family, they care about status, about appearances. His father is a senior partner in one of the biggest law firms in the city. They expect him to marry someone who comes from the same kind of world. If they knew my brother spent his days crawling around in dirty vents." She trailed off, biting her lip. She didn't have to finish the sentence. I already knew. "You think I'm an embarrassment," I said flatly. Her silence was answer enough. It was the first crack in something I thought could never break. The bond between us. The weeks after that dinner felt different. Rachel's phone calls became less frequent, her texts shorter, and her excuses longer. I told myself it was because she was busy with her career and her new relationship. But deep down, I knew. The truth was in her silence. I'd see her posts online, smiling in cocktail dresses at galas, dinners at rooftop restaurants, holding Daniel's hand as if they were a power couple straight out of some glossy magazine. And in those posts, there was no mention of me. No brother. No family dinners. No childhood home. It was as though she had edited her life, cutting me out with the precision of a lawyer's scalpel. What hurt the most wasn't being left out of those glamorous pictures. It was remembering the ones that would never be posted. The nights I stayed up fixing the heater in our freezing house, while she studied for exams. The times I patched her worn out shoes with duct tape, because we couldn't afford new ones, and I didn't want her to feel embarrassed at school. The afternoons I walked home in the rain after giving her my bus fare, because her debate practice was more important. She used to hug me and say, "One day, when I'm a lawyer, I'll take care of you the way you take care of me." I guess that promise expired when Daniel came into the picture. The breaking point came with her engagement. Word spread fast through family, friends, and neighbors, but my phone stayed silent. No invite. No save the date. No call. I only found out through an old friend of ours, who asked, "So, are you going to Rachel's big engagement party next weekend?" I felt my chest cave in. Engagement party. I didn't even know she was engaged. Later, I confronted her. I drove across town and stood on her apartment doorstep, sweaty from work and still in my HVAC uniform. She opened the door, and the look on her face said it all. Half surprise, half shame. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with the effort to stay calm. She glanced back into the apartment, as if afraid Daniel might overhear. "It just slipped my mind. Things have been moving so fast." "Don't lie to me, Rachel." I cut in. "You didn't want me there, did you?" Hey, her silence was sharper than any words. I stepped back, nodding slowly, the anger and heartbreak twisting together, like barbed wire inside me. "After everything I did for you growing up, after everything we went through, you're ashamed of me. Ashamed of what I do for a living." Her eyes glistened, but she stayed quiet. And then, like a knife, I heard it. From one of her mutual friends weeks later. She had told Daniel's family that she was an only child, that her parents had worked hard to give her a better life, but never mentioned the brother who once carried her on his back when she scraped her knee. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. The nights that followed were long and heavy. I'd sit in my small apartment, fan buzzing in the corner, staring at the ceiling and replaying our childhood in my head. The sibling who once clung to me during thunderstorms now lived in a storm of her own making. One where I wasn't even allowed to exist. It burned. It hurt like nothing I'd ever felt. But somewhere in that fire, a spark caught flame. If she thought my job made me worthless, I'd prove her wrong. If she thought success belonged only to suits and polished shoes, I'd show her what real success looked like. And one day, I swore to myself, she would see me again. Not as the brother she abandoned, but as the man she never believed I could become. 2 years passed. 2 years of silence from Rachel. 2 years of watching her life unfold from a distance, through the whispers of relatives and the polished photographs that floated around social media. She had done it. Married Daniel, the lawyer with the golden smile and the family with the silver spoons. Their wedding was grand, filled with glittering chandeliers and smiling faces, but none of those faces were mine. And me. I was still in HVAC, but no longer the guy crawling through vents for someone else's paycheck. I had built something of my own. My name was on the side of 3 vans now, my company patch stitched on uniforms that belonged to a small but loyal crew. I worked harder than ever, but this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that dignity and success aren't reserved for those with law degrees or shiny cufflinks. I didn't think I'd ever see Rachel again. Not up close, not face to face. But fate has a way of circling back, doesn't it? It was a scorching summer afternoon when my phone rang. One of my newer clients, a wealthy homeowner in a pristine neighborhood, called in a panic. Their AC had given out during a large event they were hosting. Something about a fundraiser, dozens of important guests, sweltering in tuxedos and gowns. Normally, I'd send one of my texts, but something in my gut told me to take this one myself. When I pulled up in my company van, I could already hear the hum of voices and see people fanning themselves on the grand front porch. The mansion loomed in front of me, all white columns and polished stone. I grabbed my toolkit and walked through the gates, sweat sticking to the back of my neck from the brutal heat. And then I froze. There she was. Rachel, standing near the entrance in a silk dress that shimmered under the sun, her hair perfectly styled, her posture straight and proud. She was older, more refined, but I would have recognized her anywhere. Her eyes swept over the guests, worry creasing her forehead until they landed on me. For a moment, the world stopped. Her lips parted, her face paling as if she'd just seen a ghost. Behind her, Daniel appeared, loosening his tie, sweat soaking through his expensive shirt. Finally, he sighed, spotting me with my tool bag. The AC guy. Thank God. The AC guy. I felt something hard settle in my chest, but I kept my face calm, professional. I nodded. I'll take a look at the system. Inside, the air was suffocating. Guests fanned themselves with napkins, ice clinked in empty glasses. And a woman muttered, "How can anyone host a gala like this without air conditioning?" I went straight to work, examining the massive unit tucked away in the back of the mansion. It was a mess. Overloaded and neglected, like it hadn't been serviced in years. My hands moved on instinct, steady and precise, while my mind swirled with 1,000 memories. Rachel hovered nearby, her eyes darting between me and the guests. She didn't say a word, not yet. But I could feel the tension radiating off her like the heat from the broken system. Within an hour, the machine hummed back to life. Cool air rushed through the vents, sweeping across the mansion like a blessing. Guests cheered, smiling with relief, praising Daniel's quick action in calling the best. Daniel's father, a tall man with silver hair and a presence that commanded respect, clapped me on the shoulder. "You've saved the evening, young man. Men like you keep the world running. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." The words sank deep. Not because I needed his approval, but because Rachel heard them too. I turned, locking eyes with her for the first time in years. She looked smaller now, despite the dress and the jewels. Smaller. Because she couldn't hide behind polished lies anymore. And in that heavy silence between us, I realized this was the beginning of my revenge. The vents whispered back to life, and with them, so did the crowd. Relief poured over the mansion like a cool tide. Laughter bubbling up where there had been only groans and complaints. Men unbuttoned their jackets, women dabbed their foreheads, and the party resurrected itself as if nothing had gone wrong. But for Rachel, nothing felt the same. She stood frozen near the staircase, her glass of champagne trembling in her hand, eyes locked on me. For the first time in years, she couldn't pretend I didn't exist. I wasn't some shadow of her past, hidden away. I was standing right there, in her perfect world. The one she had built brick by brick on lies. Daniel approached, his smile back in place now that the crisis was over. He clapped me on the back. "Excellent work. Honestly. I was ready to cancel the whole evening. You've saved us a fortune in embarrassment." I gave him a polite nod, professional, restrained, just doing my job. His father stepped forward then, offering me a firm handshake. "You should be proud, son. In my experience, the men who keep things running, the quiet, skilled ones, are often worth more than the ones who just make speeches." The words cut Rachel like a blade. I saw it in the flicker of her eyes, the flush of her cheeks. She looked like she wanted to melt into the marble floor. For a long moment I held her gaze. And then, for the first time since that awful night years ago, I walked toward her. Her lips parted, searching for something to say, but nothing came out. The silence between us was louder than the chatter of 100 guests. "Funny," I said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "A while back, you told me I wasn't good enough to be part of your world. That I'd only embarrass you. Yet here I am, fixing it for you." Hey, her eyes shimmered with tears she wouldn't let fall. She glanced around, terrified that someone might overhear, that her carefully constructed image might crack. I leaned closer, my voice steady but sharp as steel. "I spent years thinking I wasn't enough. That maybe you were right. But today proved me wrong. I'm not ashamed of what I do. The only shame here," I paused, letting the words sink in, "is yours." I straightened, leaving her trembling, pale, and silent. Guests had begun to glance our way, curious at her expression, whispering when they noticed the tension. The story she had told, that she was an only child, polished and perfect, was unraveling thread by thread. And I didn't need to expose her. She was doing that all by herself. Daniel called for another toast. The music swelled again, and the party went on. I packed up my tools, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked out through the grand front doors with my head high. The night air was cool against my skin, but inside me, there was a fire, steady, proud, unbreakable. I wasn't the boy who had once been erased from his sister's story. I wasn't the embarrassment she tried to bury. I was the man who built his own name, with his own hands. And as I climbed back into my van, the logo of my growing company gleaming under the streetlight, I allowed myself one final thought. The air inside that mansion might have turned cool again. But between Rachel and me, the heat of betrayal would never fade.